In this video, I'll give you a brief introduction to qualitative data analysis. Once you've collected your data, be this interviews, focus groups, diaries, observations, or other forms of qualitative data, there are four main stages to proceed with the analysis. First of all, you want to organize all the data that you have. Then you will think about identifying the framework for your analysis. And there's all sorts of different frameworks, such as thematic analysis, framework analysis, using grounded theory, among others. Third, you will choose a step for your analysis. You will choose a tool for your analysis, such as in vivo software or other types of software, pen and paper, highlighters, colored markers, or more simple software such as Excel and PowerPoint, or even Word documents. The final stage of data analysis is writing the report. We'll see each one of these in more detail. So for the first step, when it comes to organizing the data, this starts with the transcription of your data. You might be transcribing word by word, so a verbatim kind of transcription, if you have an audio recording, for example, or you might be taking notes during your interview, which means that your transcription is only based on the notes that you've taken during the interview and what you've remembered soon after. You might want to consider transcribing also non-verbal expressions such as laughter, hums, ums, and sighs, that kind of thing. One thing that I find particularly useful when transcribing data is to add timestamps if you're using an audio recording. This will help you be able to listen back to the audio of a particular transcript without having to go through the whole audio file, but just going back to the particular timestamp for that quote. Unfortunately, transcribing is very time consuming. Some say that it will take 3 to 5 times longer to transcribe than the actual audio file. So if you've got an hour-long interview to transcribe, that will take you 3 to 5 hours to transcribe. There are some tools though that you can use to help facilitate this procedure. You can use foot pedals to help you pause and play the recording. Some of them can be hacked and used to fast forward or rewind. There's also specific software for transcription. One that I've used in the past is called F5, and it will automatically add timestamps. You can create shortcuts in words, so you can just create a shortcut for, say, interview and participant without having to type it out every time, and it will automatically rewind a bit of the audio every time you pause and replay. And you can also regulate the speed of the audio that you're listening to when transcribing. Once you've transcribed all your data, what you want to do is collate any other type of data that you might have collected. This could be notes from the interview. You might have collected surveys in addition to the interview. You might have asked participants to take pictures or make drawings. And it's good practice, for example, to have almost like a profile for each participant based on all the data that you've collected from different sources. Following that, what you want to do is make sure that you're cleaning the data. That includes things like anonymizing it. For example, if they mention a workplace, if they mention the name of colleagues, if they mention their own names or personal identifiable information, you want to be able to anonymize that. And the way to do it is, for example, adding square brackets. Say the interviewer is talking about Northumbria University. What you would do is replace Northumbria University with square brackets, name of university. In this process, you also want to label the data. So each file will then have an ID for each participant so that the data remains anonymous. And you might also want to include the date and time of the data collection especially for future references at a later time. Once you have all of this together, and as you've gone through in both transcribing it, cleaning it, you will start to familiarize yourself with the data. But it might be useful to also just sit through, once it's all cleared out and tidied, sit through and read through the data to, again, familiarize yourself with it even more. Second step is to be able to identify the framework that you'll be using for your data analysis. This can be done also beforehand. When you are thinking about your research question and the method that you're picking, thinking about how you will be analysing this data is an important part of that process. In order to identify the best framework for your analysis, what you need to do is read. Read a lot of literature, read about different methods, different frameworks, and find the one that is most appropriate for you. There are all sorts of different frameworks that will vary depending on what your research question might be. Generally, though, there are two types of approaches to qualitative analysis. One is deductive or explanatory, where the analysis is guided by the research question or a theory that is trying to be developed or explained. The other type of approach is inductive, so more bottom-up approach, and exploratory, which is guided by the data itself. Depending on the framework that you've picked, how you actually code your data will vary, and that's why it's important to have a framework identified before you actually start coding and analysing the data that you have. Some of the example frameworks that I've included here are constant comparative analysis, thematic analysis, framework analysis, content analysis, narrative analysis, discourse analysis. Some of these, such as content analysis, come from the assumption that the way we speak and the words we choose have an impact on the meaning and how people make sense. So if you want to understand how people are talking about a particular issue and looking at the specific words that they're using, content analysis or discourse analysis might be an appropriate approach for you. Again, this is where I recommend that you read a lot around these different frameworks and think about what is the most appropriate one for your own project. We'll be looking at two in particular, which are constant comparative analysis and thematic analysis today. So, constant comparative analysis was originally developed by Strauss in the late 80s, and it was developed to be used as part of grounded theory, which is developed by Glaser and Strauss. But as time went on, it was clear that constant comparative analysis offers a more structured approach to the analysis, which is especially useful for novice researchers, whereas grounded theory is less structured in the way that it is applied when it comes to analysing data. However, it is an inductive way of analysing your data, so it's grounded in the data in order to develop a theory. And you start by doing line by line examination of your unit of analysis. This could be a word or a sentence or a paragraph, and you follow 3 stages. The first one is called open coding, and the idea here is that you determine categories or codes for your data. So this means deconstructing the data, examining it for similarities and differences in how people talk about a particular topic or experience. And anything that is similar in the data is labelled into the same category. So if different people are talking about how their student experience is positive, this might be labelled under the category of positive student experience, for example. Categories are then sorted into subcategories or groups of related concepts, which may be the basis for emerging theory. So again, taking the examples of positive student experience, you might want to break that down into subcategories of how does it make it, what is positive about these experiences, and see how people are talking about positive aspects in different ways. The second stage is axial coding, and this is where you determine the links between categories and subcategories. And this process involves a lot of checking, sorting, linking category names and the list of its properties. It means looking for links and relationships between different categories and trying to understand what might be the hypothesis as to why these different categories are linked to one another. But more importantly, in this process, whilst you're focusing on the categories that you've already created, you still have to go back to the original data and make sure that the criterias and list of properties that you've associated with a particular category still fits with the data overall. The third stage is selective coding, and this is where you refine what you've done so far in order to generate a theory. So you might identify one or two core categories to which all other categories that you've created are linked as subcategories. And in order for this to be one of those one or two core categories, in order for it to be central, there needs to be something that connects all these categories together. If you can't find something that connects them, you might either have to change your core category or decide to drop that category from your theory. And this is where it can be a bit painful, because you might have to end up throwing away some of the data that you've picked and categorized and coded, because at the end of the day, what you want to create is a coherent theory. Thematic analysis is a different approach. There are different streams of thematic analysis. The one I'm presenting here is the one that is developed by Brown and Clark. And this can be both inductive, so data-driven, or deductive, so top-down, more theory-driven. And again, just like with the constant comparative analysis, there's a line-by-line examination of the data through different stages, but these stages are slightly different. First of all, there's generating initial codes, whereby the researcher goes through the data and systematically codes interesting features, either based on what is emerging from the data or based on the theory or research question that they're looking for. And the idea here is that you code as much as possible into potential themes to try to explore what could emerge from the data and explore what themes there might be. Once that stage is complete, what the researcher should start to do is start to collate codes into potential themes, gathering all the data into these potential themes. This is where visualizing it might start to come in handy. So using a mind map or a table to visualize the relationship between different codes and the actual theme itself might help. It's important to say that these stages are not they're not done in a linear fashion, one after the other necessarily. It could happen that as you're coding your interviews, you notice that some codes need to be collapsed, some need to be split into further codes. You start to see relationships, you change that, and that's why having something like a mind map or a table to visualize this can help as you go through the data in an iterative process to see that evolution of how things change. The third stage is about reviewing themes. So what you want to do here is check whether the themes that you've identified work in relation to all the coded extracts that you have. And also whether they work with the entire data set. Is there anything that you've missed? Can you create a thematic map of the analysis? And again, this is where you might want to be combining or separating themes or creating sub-themes if there's too many, if one theme is maybe particularly dense or rich. And then the final stage is making sure that you've refined the specifics of each theme, meaning being able to define what makes a theme and being able to describe it briefly, generating a clear definition and clear names for each theme. Identify what the story for each theme or sub-theme is. What is the data telling us for each theme? And a theme could be something like, I'll take this from an example of a study that I've done. Walking is a good mental health strategy. That could be a theme, which combines different codes, for example, to say what are the motivations for people to walk, what are the benefits of walking, and other codes like that. If you want to learn more about thematic analysis, Virginia Brown and Victoria Clark have a website that you can look through, and they have different videos online on how to actually go through the steps of analysing data in a thematic way. Once you've got your framework, you need to think about the actual tools you'll be using for your analysis. There's all sorts of tools that you can use. You can use CADCUS, which is computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software. And there's all sorts of software here available. Through Northumbria, you will have access to NVivo. Another popular tool is called Atlas TI, and they're both quite similar. They allow you to upload a Word document or a picture or a spreadsheet or any kind of document that you've collected and create codes or categories and apply them to selected bits of text. And then you're able to sort through those codes, look at the actual quotes extracted, rather than having to look through the whole data set, for example. If you don't want to learn a particular new software to do your qualitative analysis, you can also use existing software that you already have on your computer, such as Excel or PowerPoint. You might want to create themes and categories in Excel and reorder things. For example, having each participant as a row and different codes and themes as columns, or use PowerPoint as a way of organizing your themes and quotes. And ultimately, you can also just use pen and paper and highlighters. You can print out your transcripts, you can code things by hand, highlight them. There is no right or wrong way. It's whatever you're most comfortable with. I personally find using software a lot easier because it's easier to then use the search function, for example, sort things. But I'll give you some examples later on about how I've used different types of tools for my analysis. Once you've got your framework, you've organized your data, you've selected your framework, you've got your tool, then it's time to actually analyze the data. And once you've done that, the final step is reporting the data. And what is really crucial here is that you need to be able to add quotes, because these will give credibility to your findings. It's not enough to just summarize your findings in a series of paragraphs of what people have said or what people have experienced. It's important to use findings because these can help illustrate the point that you're making, or they can help, you can use different quotes from different people to show a range of issues and perspectives. Or another nice way of using quotes is to demonstrate how there might be opposing views on a particular topic or issue. So I thought I'd make this a bit more practical and walk you through a case study of a piece of research that we've conducted recently. So what we've done is ask participants who were 21 UK university students to use an app that we developed for a month. You can see the app in the picture here, and then take part in an in-depth interview which lasted about an hour long. For this study, we collected physical activity data and interaction data from the app. So how many steps they took daily with weekly averages, how often they accessed the app, and how the scores that they got from filling out a survey in the app on a weekly basis about their mental well-being. So we also asked participants to fill out a standardized scale for their physical activity levels called the IPAC in the short form. The mental well-being scale in the app was also another standardized survey scale. And of course, we had the interview audio recordings. So when it came to analyzing this data, we had different data sources to put together. The first thing that I did was organize data using pen and paper. I created an overview table for each participant, where every row is a participant, and this table included different demographics, habits about their physical activity, answers from the questionnaires that we had, and these were integrated with handwritten notes that we took during the interviews, any corrections that they'd or explanations they've provided in the interview, and general app use. I did this in Excel, and then I printed it off because, as you can see, it's quite a big table and I couldn't see the whole table onto my screen. So I printed it off, and these are 4 A4 pages that I then stuck together onto my wall, and then just used pen and paper and highlighting similarities using color-coded highlights to forefront similarities and differences between different participants, for example. And this helped me gather a general sense of who the different participants were at a very high level. What I then did was I followed thematic analysis by Brown and Clark using Atlas TI, so a specified qualitative data software, and I coded each transcript. You can see here a screenshot of what the coded data looks like. On the left-hand column here, these are all the list of codes that I've created, which I've categorized in like mental health, whether they talk about the condition, whether they talk about a particular app called Headspace, whether they talk about stigma around mental health, whether they talk about treatment. These numbers show you the frequency of how often I've used a particular code. This text here is the actual transcript, and then for each bit I've highlighted, in this case, a whole paragraph because I didn't want to highlight a single sentence or a single word and extract it from its context. So I prefer to highlight paragraphs and then attributed different codes to it. And I've color coded them based on what they refer to. In some cases, I have just coded a sentence. this is an example of how you might do it, and this is what is reflected in like stages 1 and 2 of thematic analysis. I then, once I'd coded all the data, what I then did was I moved on to PowerPoint to help me make sense of the codes that I had and start developing different themes. So here what I did was each slide was a particular theme that I was exploring. And for each one, I started copying and pasting quotes that I'd coded and adding some annotations to give meaning to them. So for example, in this page, we see I was trying to capture what were the different attitudes towards walking that participants had. And these first 5 quotes refer to people who thought that steps were not a relevant measure for students. And so measuring steps in an app didn't actually mean much for them, but they still walked and enjoyed it, which didn't mean that if it's not measured, it doesn't count. However, as this comment suggests, this wasn't across everyone. There were some people that actually felt that steps were really important. So I thought it was necessary to make sure that I highlighted both contrasting points of view. And this is the kind of thing that then, when writing up your findings, you might want to discuss and highlight.